You've been told to lift heavy in your follicular phase, do yoga in your luteal phase, and rest during your period. But here's what no one's telling you: cycle syncing, the way it's taught on Instagram, doesn't work for most women. And if you're a high performing athlete or someone with real training goals, following these rigid rules might be sabotaging your progress. I'm Jamal, a fitness coach specializing in women's health. I've worked with dozens of women who've tried cycle syncing and felt like failures when it didn't work. So today, I'm breaking down why the popular version of cycle syncing is oversimplified, what the research actually shows, and the framework you should use instead. And if you're thinking, wait, but Dr. Stacey Sim says, stay with me. The science is more nuanced than a four-square Instagram graphic, and you deserve to know the full picture. First, let's talk about what you've been told. The cycle syncing advice you see everywhere breaks down like this. Follicular phase. Estrogen is rising, you feel energized, lift heavy, do high intensity work, set PRs. Ovulation. Peak estrogen, testosterone is high, you're at your strongest, go hard, maximum effort. Luteal phase. Progesterone starts to rise, energy starts to drop. So you dial back intensity, focus on yoga, walking, lighter weights. Menstrual phase. You're bleeding, hormones are low, rest completely, or just do gentle movement. It sounds logical, right? But here's the first major problem. When exactly are you ovulating? The advice says train your hardest during ovulation when you're at your peak strength. So ovulation doesn't happen on a fixed calendar date. It can shift by several days cycle to cycle, depending on stress, sleep, travel, illness, or changes in nutrition. So your follicular phase, the time before ovulation, is the most variable part of your cycle. Your luteal phase, relatively fixed at around 12 to 16 days, but when ovulation happens, that moves. So unless you're tracking basal body temperature every morning, checking cervical mucus, or just using ovulation strips, which, let's be honest, not every single woman is doing this daily. You don't actually know when you're ovulating. You're guessing based on a calendar that assumes 28 days. That is your cycle. And if you don't know when you're ovulating, how are you supposed to train hard during ovulation? You're just training hard on a random day. An app has told you you was ovulating. It's not science-based training, that's astrology with extra steps. Beyond the ovulation timing issue, this whole framework assumes your cycle is exactly 28 days, your hormone fluctuations are predictable and consistent, you feel the same every single cycle, your training goals don't matter, your stress, sleep, and nutrition is perfect. But that's not the reality for most women. I've had clients who feel incredible in their luteal phase and want to train hard. I've had athletes who feel terrible during ovulation when they're supposed to feel amazing. And I've worked with women whose cycles are 35 days or 25 days or completely irregular because of stress or perimenopause. So, what's actually going on here? Let's talk about what the science actually says. Here's what we know from research. I'm going to cite two major studies so you know I'm not just making this up. The first study is the gold standard meta analysis. In 2020, researchers McNulty, if I said it wrong, I apologize, and colleagues published a systematic review in the journal Sports Medicine. They analyzed 78 studies with nearly 1,000 participants. That's the largest analysis ever done on this topic. They're finding exercise performance may be trivially reduced during the earlier follicular phase, your period compared to other phases, but the effect size was just 0.06 to 0.14. In research terms, anything under 0.2 is classified as trivial, meaning it's so small it's not practically meaningful. And here's the kicker: only 8% of the studies they reviewed were high quality. Most were low quality with small sample sizes. So, what was their conclusion? General guidelines on exercise performance across the menstrual cycle cannot be formed. Rather, a personalized approach should be taken. The second slide is even stronger. In 2023, researchers Colossano Sample, hopefully I said it right, and colleagues published an umbrella review in Frontiers in Sports and Active Living. That means they reviewed all the previous meta-analysis, only looked at moderate to high quality studies, and their finding, when you only look at good quality research, 90% of studies found no difference in strength performance between menstrual cycle phases. 90%. Their conclusion was blunt. It is premature to conclude that short-term fluctuations in reproductive hormones applicably influence acute exercise performance or longer-term strength or hypertrophic adaptations. This translation is the cycle phase effects you've been told about are either tiny or don't exist for most women. Now, hormones. Do they matter? Estrogen can reduce muscle protein synthesis. Progesterone can increase body temperature, perceived exertion. And these are real physiological effects. But, and this is the crucial part, the magnitude of these effects varies widely between women. Some women experience noticeable shifts, others barely notice any difference. And many women's subjective experience doesn't match what the hormones are supposed to be doing. What matters more than cycle phase? Sleep, stress, and nutrition, and training consistency. These factors have far bigger impacts on your performance than what day of your cycle it is. If you're under recovered, under eating, or overtraining, try to cycle sync. It won't fix those issues. And here's the reality for elite athletes: they don't follow rigid cycle protocols. Yes, they track their cycle. Yes, they pay attention to how they feel, but they don't cancel heavy training sessions because it's the luteal phase. They just based on actual symptoms and performance data, not a calendar app. Now, let me tell you why most cycle syncing programs you see online are not just ineffective, they're actually setting you up to fail. Here's the problem with buying a women's cycle syncing training program: the person selling it doesn't know your cycle. They're giving you a generic program based on a textbook protocol of a 28-day cycle. But we've just established that the follicular phase length varies widely, ovulation timing shifts, and half of female athletes either use hormonal contraception or have a regular cycle. So you're following a program designed for a cycle you don't have. That's like buying a custom suit off the rack. It doesn't fit. But let's say you do have a perfect 28-day cycle and you follow the program exactly. Here's what that looks like in practice. You train hard during the follicular phase. So let's say 7 days. You train hard. During ovulation, maybe 2, 3 days. That's roughly 7 to 10 days of actual progressive training per month. The rest of the month, light weights, yoga, walking, Pilates, restorative work. Now tell me this: how are you going to build muscle or lose body fat training hard for 7 days out of 30? You can't. Progressive overload doesn't work like that. Muscle growth requires consistent, repetitive stimulus. Fat loss requires sustained energy expenditure and maintaining muscle mass through the resistance training. So if you only lift heavy 1 week per month, you're not building muscle, you're just maintaining it at best. The light movement, the other 3 weeks, isn't enough stimulus to drive meaningful change. So these programs are setting you up to spin your wheels. You'll be tired from the training you do, you'll feel like you're working hard, but you won't see the results. And then you'll blame yourself instead of the flawed program. So here's what elite athletes actually do. They don't restrict their training, they adjust nutrition and their recovery strategies around their cycle to support consistent hard training. So feeling bloated and sluggish in your luteal phase, adjust sodium, increase hydration, maybe add an extra rest day if needed. But you don't need to stop lifting heavy for 2 weeks. If you're dealing with cramps during your period, anti-inflammatories, heat, proper fueling, and you can still train, you might just modify the volume or the exercise selection on that day. The goal is to train consistently across your entire cycle by managing symptoms and not avoiding training when the symptoms show up. There's a difference between evidence-based coaching and Instagram nonsense. And look, I'm not saying all women's programs are garbage. I run women's programs myself. But if someone's telling you a cycle syncing as a solution without knowing anything about your individual cycle, your symptoms, your training history, or your goals, that's a red flag. And I'm not the only one saying this. Even the pioneer of this conversation had to falter her position. Dr. Stacey Sims is one of the leading researchers in female athlete physiology, and I've done her courses. She was one of the first people talking about training around the menstrual cycle, literally started the conversation about 7 to 8 years ago. But recently, 2025, which was like last month, she published an article, The Evolution of Menstrual Cycle Training. And here's what she said. For years, the conversation centered on the menstrual cycle. High intensity in the follicular phase, endurance in luteal, rest during your period, and for transparency, I was one of the first to start talking about this. But the more data we collect, the clearer it becomes. There's no single right way for all women to train around their cycles. Her recommendation: train by readiness, not by the calendar. Periodize your training across months, not days. Track what actually matters: energy, sleep, mood, performance markers. So if the person who pioneered this field has moved beyond rigid cycle syncing protocols, maybe it's time we all did too. That's why I created a framework that actually works for real women with real goals. So what should you do instead? Here's the framework I use with my clients. Instead of rigid cycle syncing rules, use what I call cycle-aware training. It's not about following a protocol, it's about developing body literacy and making informed decisions. So step 1, track your cycle and your symptoms. Not just day 14 ovulation, track how you feel, energy levels, motivation, strength, recovery, sleep quality, appetite. Use an app, use a journal, whatever works for you. You're looking for your patterns, not just the textbook patterns. Step 2, notice trends over 3 to 6 cycles. One cycle tells you nothing. You need more months of data to see if you have consistent patterns. Maybe you always feel terrible the day before your period. Maybe you feel strongest on day 7. And maybe there's no pattern at all. And that's useful information too. Step 3, create flexibility windows, not rigid rules. Instead of I must rest in my luteal phase, think in the second half of my cycle, I might need more recovery days. I'll plan my program so I can dial back if needed, but I won't force it if I feel good. Step 4, use the decision tree. Ask yourself, how do I feel today? Not what should I feel? Am I hitting my performance markers, which is like strength, reps, times? Am I recovering well? So that's like sleep, soreness, mood. What are my goals this training block? PR attempts versus volume accumulation. If you feel great and performance is there, train as planned, regardless of your cycle phase. If you feel off, but it's not cycle related, so that's bad sleep, high stress, address the root cause, don't blame the cycle. If you consistently feel worse at a certain phase and it's impacting performance, adjust programming for that window. The key difference is you're making an informed decision based on your body's feedback, not following rules from a podcast you heard. So here's the bottom line. Cycle syncing, as it's probably taught, is oversimplified. Your body is more complex than a 4-phase graphic. The research doesn't support rigid protocols, and the high-performing women succeed by paying attention to the individual responses, not following rigid design rules for the average. If you're a high-achieving woman who wants to train intelligently with your physiology and not against it, I help clients develop this exact framework through personalized coaching. There's a link below if you want to start coaching. And if you want to understand more about training as a woman, specifically around topics like REDS, menopause, and metabolic health, I've got a whole series coming up. Make sure you're subscribed. So what's your experience with cycle syncing? Have you tried it? Did it work? Let me know in the comments. I generally want to hear what your experience has been. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.